Howdy, it's Bonnie. I have a quick ad for you. I've started podcast recording about 4 years ago. Always been on the hunt for a good platform to invite my guests and conduct the interviews. One that would allow me to have control over the audio quality and one that would assist me once issues arise. It's not super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using a browser and start recording a high quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with a few guests. Feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality even if the connection is unstable. Go now to zencaster.com/pricing and use my code BonniesLegends, that's BONNIESLEGENDS, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Bonnie's Legends. My name is Bonnie Orbison, and today's legend is Jack from Telyscopes. Telyscopes is one of those bands that you just can't believe they're not well known and touring around the world. I remember usually my research for every interview is going through the entire albums and EPs and singles and give them a listen, and Telyscopes has at least 10 albums in their catalog, and all of them are so individually unique and creative that it was really inspiring and such a pleasure to talk to Jack about creativity. And we talked about the new album, An Egmont in April. It's out since April 13th, and give that album a listen. It's truly like listen to it from beginning to end and do nothing. Just bask in the soundscape of that album. It's amazing. It's definitely gonna be one of the albums, one of my favorite albums of the year. Definitely. So Jack and I, we talked about the album, the process of it, but we also talked about processing feelings through music, and we talked about Tim Buckley and also about poetry and David Lynch. And yeah, it was a really nice chat, and I'm so excited to share it with you. And yeah, have fun listening to this. And you know where to find us, you know what to do, to subscribe and follow us, and leave us a review if you really enjoyed this episode. It really helps out as independent journalists. And yeah. All right, have fun listening to this conversation with Telyscopes. And definitely check out, I've completely forgot about this, definitely check out the album on Bandcamp, because as far as I know, if you purchase the album on Bandcamp, you get extra 30 tracks, including stems and a full lyrics booklet. That lyrics booklet is so creative, so art, it's definitely worth checking out. Okay, that's it. Enjoy this conversation with Jack and me, and tune in next week again. Everyone listening, I have Jack Hubble from Telyscopes with me. Hi.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being my guest on my podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. I feel like I've been I feel like my brain's been consumed with your music. Yeah, I feel like I've been very much in a Telyscopes mindset. Like I've been listening to the music and like researching a few things, and yeah, as I said, I'm very impressed. And like, um, there's a there's a variety of
Mhm.
things. Like I feel like every, like if someone's like, oh, I only like rock, or like if someone's just, oh, I only like folk, well, like, well, folk and rock is kind of sort of, well, like if anyone is like very picky about their music, I feel like Telescopes will be something for everyone in a sort of way. And so I really like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a bit all over the place and chaotic. So, but yeah, hopefully that's the takeaway and not, why can't you pick something and stick to it? But
No, I feel like it's a one of those questions of like, do I pick a niche? Do I not pick a niche? It's like, no, like, you know, fuck the niche. Like, as well, you can swear on here, by the way.
okay, this isn't college radio. Good to know.
No, this is not college radio. Sometimes I wish, but no, not really. I like having a podcast. But yeah, I also like it, and and you told me that I should listen to it like from beginning to end, which I usually tend to do. But it was because I open up the Google. This is a long story. I opened up the Google Drive, and because I knew that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna download all of the tracks and then all gonna queue them, so that way it doesn't like I don't have to click on them individually and let them play. Um, and so it was really interesting because I was listening to it and I was like, as we said, there's a variety of like genres, and um, I feel like lyrically it's a it goes all hand in hand together. I mean, you hear that it is one album and it is one project, but it was like there were so many worlds you like dived in. Like I was listening to this while I was reading, so it was like different mood changes and like different feelings, and so I was like, this. I know what you told me. I have to listen to this from beginning to end, and like what you say, it's like a project. It's like an art piece, really. So yeah.
Well, I don't know if people at home will listen to it entirely from beginning to end, but I do feel like it was meant as one sort of piece of music. And
Yes.
going into it, I wanted to release it as one, like 30, 40, however long it is now,
Oh,
one
nice.
30 or so minute long track. And at a certain point, it was like, this just feels ridiculous, because then if you have a favorite song in there, you have to skip to that exact minute
Mm,
mark. And um, but yeah, so I'm kind of conflicted about that, because then if I send someone a Google Drive folder, and I think the way that Google organizes things sometimes it's just kind of random, or whatever's been opened most recently, and so then you hear it in just some random order, or like reverse order or something, and
yes.
so I don't know. I don't expect everyone to listen to the whole thing from start to finish, and I hope that the songs individually can be enjoyable, but no, it very much was one kind of piece of music, I think. So,
Yeah. I mean, when you listen to Ballad of the Egg Moon, the song that he sent me in, and that is the title track, it's it gives you kind of a preview of what the album sort of sounds, and like I feel like the song itself already has like like different parts and different moods, and as I said, like it's a perfect representation of the album. That was a good introduction to the album. Yeah.
thank you. I mean, yeah, I don't know how much that song encapsulates like the intention or the rest of the album. It kind of, that's
Mm,
one where I can't say that I can't say that I have like a favorite song, right? But
yes.
I think that a lot of times you come up with an idea and then it comes out just completely different, or, maybe the
Mm,
idea itself is a little half baked, and and it's kind of a gamble when you actually sit down and try and figure out how it's going to work in the arrangement and the recording. And I do think that was the most surprising track, because it was maybe the last one I added in. It was like recorded as one piece of music, and then I had to slice it right in the middle to add that song in and cut a different song out that wasn't working. And yeah, I think I'm just surprised with how that one came out. But thank you. And I think, yeah, I think that maybe there's variety. I think that going into it, I was a bit concerned that they all just sounded the same because they're all in the same key or like relative keys.
Okay.
And so I was a bit concerned that, you know, it wouldn't work outside of one long piece of music. But so I'm glad to
No,
hear
it
that.
does.
At least you think there's some variety in there.
So we already mentioned it, but the album is called Egg Moon, An Egg Moon in April, and it's already out for the listener of this episode. But it's coming out on April 13th, and that made me smile because that's my grandma's birthday. So
Nice.
so it's a special day. Yeah, I'm curious because you also sent me in like as one of the things you wanted to talk about. You wanted to talk about egg imagery, and obviously I mean, obviously we mentioned that the track is called Ballad of the Egg Moon, and the album is called An Egg Moon in April. And I'm sort of if I read the lyrics, and I'm sort of curious. As a writer myself, I'm sort of curious where the eggs are coming from. If they're a metaphor for something, or if they're it's like it's because eggs are like, I don't know, for me eggs are something that I eat for lunch, and different kind of variety again. But
Well,
yeah.
I think that egg and moon can be sort of synonyms, really, and poetry. But I think that, yeah, I mean, something attracted me to the sort of maybe gross or like mundane uh, imagery of the egg, and that, and well, I think it's been in other songs in the
Mm-hmm.
past that are it's used, in a sort of jarring or unpleasant way. And I think that, yeah, there's something maybe lighthearted or playful about it that attracted me, and the sort of parallel between that and moon and what they can represent. Also, the full moon in April happens to be referred to as the egg moon, also the pink
Mm-hmm.
moon, and probably a long
Yes.
list of other moons. Um, and totally unrelated, arbitrary thing. But I think when I started releasing music, specifically as Telyscopes, any other project, we never did this, but I always correlated release dates with the moon cycle, primarily the full moon. And there's no real meaning behind that. It was just a weird, I think as a kid, I was obsessed with architecture and Egyptology and the way that, pyramids of Giza in particular will track different solar patterns. And so it's just like fun. It was just a fun way to like, pick a release date also. And it's like, oh, well, then if you go back
Yes.
and look at all the release dates, you can see that they correlate with the moon at any given year. So all that kind of came together where I was like, well, if by default, I'm not going to break the pattern now. I'm just going to find a full moon to release it. And then it sort of worked its way into, I think, the album and the project.
Yeah. And it's coming out in April, and the April is in the title, so I found that was also very matching.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
April 13th that's the full moon. So it comes out, on the full moon
Yes.
in April,
Nice.
which again, arbitrary, no meaning really behind that. But
Yeah.
it's finally acknowledging the fact that I think all of these have at some point come out on full moons. So
And I like that because, like, picking a date is usually, especially for like something you launch or like something you put out, it's very, I don't know. You can get really, like, you can overthink that a lot, for me personally. So I like that you just went with the moon cycles. Makes it a lot easier. You just have to pick a month.
yeah, I mean, I think doing it that way that's probably like the intention behind why I started doing that. I do think
Yeah.
it was fun. I do think that like having a time and date set for a release or a piece of art and then it coming out at that time and day, it is kind of fun
Yes.
because it's like, oh, well, this is like, you know, curating some sort of event or something. I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes sense, but not that this will be an event when
Makes
it
sense.
releases, but
It's good. I like it. Um, yeah, before we dive into it, as I already mentioned, you have
an impressive discography, and as someone like that interviews a lot of like newer and upcoming artists, I like they have been maybe around for like, I don't know. I think the band that I interviewed that was the longest together was like 5 years. So like in on well on Spotify, you started like the first. Is it an album? I should have written
I
this
don't know what
down.
the oldest is in the discography, to be honest.
I mean, it definitely. So I looked. I only looked at the date, and it was 2014, and
Okay.
that was really impressive because that's like over 10 years now. Like that's over a decade, and so I was like curious if you have any advice or like if there's a secret to keeping up a band or like keeping up a like a like you don't release music under your name, Jack Hubble. You release music under the name Telyscopes, which makes it seem like it's a band. I don't know if you changed members or like if just friends like collaborate with you and that's how you put it out. But like it's a it's like there's a I know the word consistency is kind of overused nowadays, but it's like this is like the original form of like how consistency used to be. Like you just pick a name and then you run with it. Like I feel like that's rare in today's music, if that makes sense.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. I think that it was just my personal music project, and
Yeah.
so yeah. I mean, I think if it's like a proper band, then it makes sense that people move or people stop, working together and things shift
Yes.
around. But yeah, I mean, I think at a certain point it just becomes habitual, maybe, and you've already released a certain amount of music, and I think it's fun to reference other music projects or have musical sort of
Yeah.
callbacks to previous projects, and so it's kind of hard now to change it up. But in terms of advice, I don't know. I think I was just pretty obsessed with making music as
Hmm.
a teenager and like into my early 20s, in a way that I think in hindsight was pretty maybe detrimental to other areas of my life. But yeah, it was just like a complete, obsession. And I think like I had some pretty gnarly, traumatic experiences in my late adolescence and early 20s. And I think that it did become sort of an outlet, like a primary outlet for processing those things. I don't
Hmm.
think that I'd recommend that to anyone. I think that it's romantic to, put your
Yes.
your struggles into art, but I think it would have been more effective to just have proper therapy
Yeah.
and not making music. But I mean, I think like yeah, I mean, doing it yourself is nice. Being able to record and arrange and be self sufficient is helpful because then you're not limited by budget. And I don't think that you necessarily go into making any sort of art with the
Mm.
headspace of I'm going to make this or that. I'm going to make this genre of music and put out an album necessarily. I think that it's almost an impulsive thing sometimes.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's really not something I would advise anyone to do because it gets in the way of, you know, having a consistent job or paying utilities and things. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, as someone who like this podcast started very impulsively 5 years ago, but I also didn't know I would be doing this for 5 years, and I have hit points where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. But then I looked at all the interviews that I said I would still put out, and all the interviews that already out were out and were giving me all these new interviews, and I was like, "Ah, I cannot really stop now," and so I can relate to that.
well, I really like
Yeah.
how, not to go off topic, I really like how what you're doing with your podcast is not it's not hyper focused on music or one genre of music, and because then you have
Mm.
writers come on and you kind of
Yeah.
it's a wider range of of creators that you're interviewing. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that gives you a lot of opportunity also in the future. If you get into something else, a
Yeah.
different topic or a different medium, then you can start interviewing maybe visual artists. I'm sure that would be harder if it's audio, if you're presenting visual art, but something adjacent to that,
That's
where,
true.
you know, I think you have unlimited access to all sorts of
Oh,
people.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't start it as a music podcast. I just interviewed a lot of people that I looked up to and I wanted to interview, and then suddenly I woke up one morning and I was like, oh, I think I have sort of rid myself in a corner of music. And I liked it, but also I was craving a bit more freedom. And that's like, I know I'm at a point where I've craved out, like, oh, Pretty New Music is just the section for music. And then the general seasons are usually like creatives. Yeah. Thanks.
No, of course.
It was
And
nice to hear that.
I think that non-music specific interviews and conversations, you know, are the most interesting. I think that being interviewed by people that specifically make music and do podcasts about making music, it just becomes really technical, and it turns into, you know, what are you using to record, and what is this and this? And it's like, well, I don't want to talk about
Yes.
microphones. I want to talk about what was the intention behind making the
Yeah.
music. That's what I'd want to listen
Yes.
to also, you know.
Yeah, that's why I usually give the artist the choice of like, what are we asking? Like, I obviously have like, a questionnaire of things, and as you said, like to music, it's like, like there's like after 5 years, there are only so many questions that you can ask about music or like the album. But yeah, I like when people actually also suggest me things. So it makes it a lot more easier to like talk about something else than just how long did it take you and like which studio did you go to is exactly. um yeah. Talking about that. I also it was because you mentioned writers and you mentioned that you also I can hear from you talking and probably from the emails that we exchanged that you are very much like interested in writing and writers and poetry, and like you sent me a poem, and like it was how did you call it, supplementary reading, felt very professor like.
Well, I think it was more contextually just because because your podcast does focus on that. I wanted to sort of be like,
Yes.
here are some bullet points
Oh.
if you want to talk about these. You know, if it was
Oh,
a
that's
podcast
nice.
about audio
Yes.
recording, I don't think I would have gone to that length necessarily. But
I appreciated the poem. Yeah.
no, I think that that's what attracted me in a way to music and making music. As a kid, I wasn't so much wanting to perform or be really great at an instrument. It was, I grew up with CDs. I had like my dad's CD collection, and then just like random things I would find at thrift stores, and sitting and having the lyric booklet and reading the lyrics while I'm listening to the music, and the artwork and the whole package of the physical medium. And I think that, that was just as important. And I think that if you have intention behind writing, and whether it's just words or just music even, I think that those two kind of work hand in hand. And I think you have to put as much emphasis, if you're going to put words in a song, for the most part, unless it's self-aware and your words are meaningless and that's deliberate, that's different. But no, I think there has to be intention behind that. And so it's never like you write a song and then everything's finished and then you're like, okay, day of recording vocals, what are the lyrics?
Yes.
What is it trying to convey? Because then it feels like an afterthought,
I'm definitely more attracted to like music that like like for I know everyone talks about him right now, but like I'm a big Bob Dylan fan, and I don't think I would listen to so much Bob Dylan if I wouldn't be interested more in the lyrics than the music, actually, um, or the singing. You know, someone might argue he cannot sing, and yeah, and I sometimes I do admire people that simply can just listen to music without any lyrics, and I do that sometimes. Like I'm a big fan of jazz as well. That usually is instrumental without a lot of lyrics, and but yeah, mostly the music that I choose, and probably one of the reasons why I liked Ballad of the Agni music is because it's very lyrically, and there are a lot of metaphors and a lot of imageries, and um, I like that. I don't like when someone actually tells me what the song is about in the song. Like, I need to think about, like, I want to think about it and like um like listen to it and like choose my own definition of the song.
I think I like a variety as a listener. I do think I like sometimes when someone's very upfront. I think I end up abstracting a lot. I don't know if that's intentional. um, and yeah, no, I was going to say, I actually, props for listening to this while reading, because if anything has language in it, I can't listen to it while I'm reading. I just can't. I start listening and like reading the words that the person is singing. So I'm pretty much
Yeah,
confined to all instrumental, all jazz, or anything if I'm reading something.
yeah.
But no, I mean, I think that those two things can be completely separate. I think that for
Hmm.
my personal preference, though, if you're going to put lyrics in music, I think it's really important, because I can enjoy Bob Dylan, right? But it could be the best music, and if the lyrics fall short, then I'm not really
Hmm.
gonna enjoy it, I don't think. And I'm sure that plenty of
Yes.
people will disagree and have the opposite opinion, but
Yeah, I agree. I had a lot of discussions already with like friends, so like musician friends that like disagreed with me at that point. That you can just also just appreciate, like, a good song can just be a good song, even though the lyrics are, I don't know, he said that and she said that and I love you and I love you back. Like, like I want some more depth to it. Um and so yeah.
I don't think I'm really like a musician. I don't consider myself that, at least. I mean, I play instruments and I guess I write music when I feel the need to, but um, I don't really consider myself that or have any interest in studying it or mastering music as a subject.
Mm.
Um, and I think I care more about like visual mediums of art, if
Mm.
anything. Um, and I think that that goes in. I think that goes into what you gave me on the list to ask. But I think that if you don't mind me cutting ahead, uh,
No.
I think that yeah, I just was really obsessed with making music as a teenager and in my early 20s, and I used it sort of as a substitute for a licensed therapist. And I think that I tried really hard to sort of get away from obsessing over it.
Mm.
At a certain point, because of the state of our healthcare system here, and various other reasons, I got to the point where I was like, well, I can't be a person. I can't really have a decent quality of life if I don't do something that makes more money, and not to make this podcast about making money and capitalism, but it's like I have to find some way to make money at some point, potentially, hypothetically, and do something that I also want to do with my time. And it's not happening with music. And I was teaching music lessons and I was doing like freelance recording or mixing, but it's just not really enough to get by. And so I went back to school in like 2022. And I really tried to just not let myself fixate and get into the zone, the headspace of making music. And I was pretty successful at doing that. Um, and I did explore. I have some sort of anonymous. I have one primary anonymous music project where a friend of mine, we would work on. I want to say it's almost more just shit posting. It's, it's meme music, but and that was nice, and I think that helped me sort of reestablish my relationship with making music. Uh,
Mm.
and so this project was just the voice memos and the musical fragments that I had was intended to be for that project. Um,
Mm.
and a lot of it is parody. So we've done, albums that parody country, that parody, songs or albums that parody other, specific genres of music. And
Yeah.
this was actually intended to be sort of a parody of 1950s rock,
Mm.
rockabilly. Um,
Yes.
and so I think early on in brainstorming for that joke project, even, I was trying to parody that, but also make it work conceptually because I feel like there's a lot to draw from, especially with American culture and the imagery of American culture. I think that, post World War II America, is very glorified in media, and it has different representations, and it's turned into like a weird simulacrum almost. And so I think that gave me a lot to work with. And I think also just enjoying some of the music
Mm-hmm.
from that era gave me a lot to listen to and work with. I don't think that there's much on the project, maybe outside of like the first track that really withholds that. I
Mm.
think that most of, or I mean, holds that up. I think that most of it is deviates and becomes, just indie music. But then, yeah, I think that I had some personal things happen, and I think that it was at a point where I needed the outlet that music provided in
Yeah.
previous years, and um, I just sort of impulsively started, writing and arranging the songs in a way that was definitely felt more intentional and serious than, the joke
Yeah.
project. But really, up until a couple months ago, I still was debating if I should release it at all, if I should release it under the joke project, and if it should just be another Telescope album. And I think my fear was that it wasn't as good as other Telescope albums. I think that I
Mm.
get really obsessive and controlling of outcomes with art. And I think that being able to spend, 12 or 14 hours a day obsessing over projects in my early 20s, and then now it was like I'm so limited on time. Um, so I had this
Mm.
fear that it wasn't as good because it's simplified or because I didn't have all the time in the world to make it. And I think some of my friends convinced me just to release it as a Telly album. And
And we're glad they did.
well, I think that there is something really because I think that when a project is attached to your name and your
Mm.
personhood, especially now, I mean, I think when I was a teenager, I didn't really care. And so I did all kinds of weird shit with, my friends who were participating in Telescopes or just myself. But now it's like, okay, well, I'm, finishing my degree. I have to have a LinkedIn. I have to like look like a normal person. So I can't have all this crazy
Yes.
shit. And, yeah, and I think that having an anonymous outlet, you're not thinking about how other people will perceive you, and you're really just
Mm-hmm.
making something. And so I will admit that that was definitely a concern too with this project. Is this too on the nose? Is it too vulnerable?
Mm.
Um, I don't think it's any more personal than other projects. I think that maybe I just have more concern for that now.
Yeah.
Um,
Or it's like it's fresher, you sometimes don't think, like, I don't think much anymore about the people I wrote my debut novel about, but I do still think about, like the book that I'm putting out next. Like, what do people that I wrote about there are going to think about the book? um so maybe just because it's like fresher, or like It's, it's the latest thing in your, I don't know, in your Google Drive, so that it feels, because of like that, it feels like that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. Because I guess what you're saying is like, yeah, like over time, you have a detachment from your
Hmm.
personal life. Even though it
Yes.
was your personal life, it's no longer current.
Yes.
I mean, no, that makes
Yeah.
sense. I still think that the creation of something knowing that no one's ever potentially going to connect it with you does feel
Mm,
exciting. It creates a sort of mystery behind the thing that you're making.
for sure. Yeah.
But
I mean, and that's the beauty of, like, as you said, like, you don't put it out over like your own name, and like, um I didn't really find much as a journalist. I'm admitting to that. I didn't really find much about, like, I found like a few things about telescopes, but I didn't find a lot about, Jack Happel, and I didn't even know that that was your name before we started like email back and forth. So
hmm,
um
that's interesting. I
yeah.
mean, I feel like that's valid. I don't think that people will necessarily find telescopes, but it still
Mm,
exists. I think if you Googled my name
yeah.
and you really were digging, I think you could find it. And so with my said anonymous project, I think that there's, unless you played a track side by side or knew me personally, I don't think you would recognize it as me singing.
Yes.
Um, and so I think knowing that someone could find telescopes is what gave me reservation about
Mm,
that. But I would say that most of my reservation with this was just trying not to get lost in making music and focus on other things. And so it made it interesting trying to balance.
mm,
For me, anything impulsive and creative like that, it can't be done on like a schedule. You can't say like, okay,
yeah.
this is 4 hours, 2 days a week that I'm going to sit down and do this. It's sort of like once I start doing it, I'm doing it for 12 hours. And so I just don't let
Yeah.
myself do it. And so I wrote all of this in probably like a week or two, honestly, it was my winter break, 24 into 25. And so like starting around December of 2024, I wrote all this and I recorded the vocals and the guitars, like just like a guide guitar. And then
Yeah.
there was like a slow process of adding other instruments, and then an even slower, annoying process of mixing and mastering, uh, just for financial reasons. In hindsight,
Yeah.
I was planning, I think, the whole time to have someone else do those things, but then every time it was ready for a mix or for a master, I just was like, I can't blow a bunch of
Yeah.
money on this right now. Um, so yeah, it definitely was drawn out, but I think that the actual creative process was really short, and I think maybe part of that is because it had been so long. It had been like 3 years or something since I seriously wrote
Mm,
music. Um, I think that contributed to just having a burst of ideas, and I think like needing an outlet. I think, and writing about, even if it's not like super on the nose and literal. I think that, uh, and I think that that's how it is usually. I don't think that I can always fully articulate or define uh, what I'm experiencing emotionally. I think I have a lot of difficulty with
mm,
that, and but I think that I can hopefully kind of encapsulate what it is that I'm experiencing in a more abstracted way with music,
yeah.
or putting words to music. And um, so yeah, no, it came out pretty quickly, and then it just was a year of annoying tasks that felt just like tedious work, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Nice. I think mainly why I also picked up on the writing part is because you mentioned Lorca. You mentioned Federico Garcia Lorca. Yeah, I it was really interesting for me because I am so like, I like Tim and Jeff Buckley's music. I don't think I've really deep dived into it though. So it was always like something that I was like listening to and was like, oh, I should do like, I should spend a Sunday just watching documentaries and reading articles about about the Buckleys. And so I really like that you sent me Lorca in, and then I was like, oh, because I knew it from the album, and then I was like, oh, and then suddenly I was like, things were clicking in my brain, and then I was like, oh, here we have my Saturday afternoon that I can spend researching on it. Um, so yeah, I'm curious, because he said it, like, was it a big influence in this album, or like
Well, I think that
inspiration, like, yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I think that there are elements of both of those things that I've always liked, right? I think that
Yeah.
um, there's a broad range of poetry and music that I've enjoyed. I think that with Lorca, I think with any sort of like maybe like queer literature, it felt more topical, exploring sort of like the idea of like a queer relationship in the aesthetic context of like 1950s America. It just felt like if I was going to make something that about relationship or a dynamic that was inherently queer, I'd wanted to do it at the same time as exploring 1950s Americana, because I felt like those things kind of had a weird juxtaposition and could be more colorful, perhaps. Not that
Yeah.
not that our current time is any different necessarily, given what's happening, but
Yes.
and I think that is maybe a nice way to connect it with current events, but no. So I think that Lorca's writing and writing in general was a bigger influence than I would say musically Tim Buckley as an influence. But I will say that
Yeah.
Tim Buckley having, I think one of my favorite albums of his is Lorca. And I think that it felt right to have a song there's a song called Look at the Fool on the project. And I think I was writing about that also partially just, turning 30 and having taken a break from making music. It almost felt like there was like a weird embarrassment or humiliation in making an album. And it wasn't like I was like making something that had a ton of commercial appeal or trying to go that route, but it felt relatable to that later period of Tim Buckley's life. And so I just kind of tried to work it in if I could. But I'd say musically that had no influence, really. Maybe on earlier projects it definitely did, but on this one I would say it didn't.
When you mentioned how you didn't do like an Eggman in April is not really, I don't know, you calling it not commercial, and like as someone like I went to music school, and like when, especially in the beginning when you mentioned how you wanted it to put it out as just like a 30-40 minute track, it's really interesting because for me it feels like you wrote your own sort of symphony right there. So I that imagery just came into my mind. I thought I would tell you that this is your symphony.
It's funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I missed the mark. I think that it turned into little concise 2-3 minute songs. I think I could have done more with actually weaving the music into a full 30-minute symphony, as you say. But and I think that in terms of lyrical inspiration, though, I think that any poetry is helpful. I think that there is something that always appealed to me about the repetition and the maybe sort of almost like childish element of some of Lorca's work. Because sometimes I'll read things that I really enjoy, but it's like difficult to use that as actual lyrical inspiration when it's dense or over the top. I mean, I guess sure I was kind of aware of the wasteland, or I think that An Eggman in April, even the title is sort of, I was trying to maybe, or at least I was conscious of Yeats with A Full Moon in March is, I think, one of his first books. But that wasn't very like, it wasn't like I sat down and was like, this is the, it was just like, oh, I
Yeah.
happen to be referencing these various
Yes.
things sort of subconsciously or like loosely.
Yeah. Nice. Well, yeah. So that kind of goes hand in hand. But like, what would you say? We've already mentioned that the lyrics are very abstract, and I I liked it because I feel like the music, you can listen to it, and I mean, at the end of the day, everyone, like, even if you're upfront in your lyrics, I think at the end of the day, everyone who listens to it is gonna take away something else from it, or like is gonna think about like their own memory about like sort of that reminds them of the song. But I'm curious what the overall theme of this project is. Um, yeah,
Um,
Liv having read the lyrics as well.
I mean, yeah, I think that it has a couple maybe overall themes. I think like, um, I think from the beginning, I think I wanted to explore the 1950s
Hmm.
aesthetic. I think that works
Yeah.
its way in. But what sort of transitioned this over into more of a serious project is, I was seeing someone for a couple of years, and you could say it's sort of in origin like a breakup album, but I don't think it's hyper specific about any particular person. I
Hmm.
think that was a good foundation. I think that I think that yeah, I think that there's like a maybe a longing for um, a sort of hypothetical uh, maybe relationship or a dynamic, and I think that I don't think it ever happened. I don't think that that was reality, but I think that there was that feeling um, of maybe coping with that, coping with the fact that maybe, or I shouldn't say the fact that, but coping with the possibility that your interactions with the person
Hmm.
had more to do with you glorifying the person or romanticizing the person as maybe a projection of yourself and less
Hmm.
of the actual person. And um, so I wouldn't say it's like the in the literal sense of, oh, this is, a
Yeah.
relationship ended and therefore I make an album about it, or but I think that there was a lot of complexity in what I was experiencing throughout that dynamic and then also after.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was all, it was things that I had thought about or considered, but hadn't really fully processed or,
Yeah.
um, organized. And so I think to do that and to sit down and organize it and put it into something that is still an abstraction but has some grounding in that was maybe a crude form of therapy. Um,
Yeah.
so,
No.
and I think that, yeah, like a lot of, at least I'm not sure if you experienced this, but with things that are referencing either they're self-referential or they're referencing various other sources or media. I mean, I think that you make those connections in the moment of writing the thing.
Hmm.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure if you've had an instance where you have a line or you have imagery and then it reminds you of this other thing, this piece of music or this other, writer. And then you just
Hmm.
kind of slowly make these connections and
Yes.
it comes together as one connected thing that's referencing various sources of media, but
Yes.
it's not like you gather those in the beginning and say, yes, I'm going to
Yeah.
reference
No.
things.
Yeah. No. I can relate to that. I tend to get, especially because I'm listening mostly to music that is very lyrically focused, I do reference a lot of lyrics, let's say, like, let's call it like that, or like, um especially like sometimes I write a line and then it's like sort of reference to the song I've been constantly listening to and repeat, and I'm like, oh right, cool. Yeah, I tend to listen to music as well when I write my own poetry, which is very interesting because, as you mentioned, like usually people cannot even people cannot even read while listening to music that has lyrics in it, and here I am sitting there, but I can just zone out. Like I don't know how I do it, but I just zone out the lyrics. But then, maybe by re-listening to the song, I do discover that one or two words are the same as in the poem. And then I'm like, oh, well.
That is interesting, though, how it can seep in without you knowing. And I think that, I mean, would you say that any sort of experiences you have, those sort of seep in subconsciously, or do you think that it's more of an obvious thing when you're listening to something and it seeps into your writing?
I don't think it's obvious. I think it's subconscious. Yeah, I've never really. I remember only one time where I was interviewed this artist, but they had a line of their song which was "Love is Agony," and because I never thought of love as agony, but it suddenly gave like a lot of feelings that I had, like words to it. I was very fascinated by that one line in there of their song, and so I remember writing it in my poem, but like being like I like mentioned the singer, I was like, writer said love is agony. And then I wrote my own processes of what I had thought about that over the past couple of days. Like, that's the only time where I remember sitting down with a reference and being like, yes, I need to turn this into a poem and I need to give it my 2 cents to it. Yeah.
No, I mean, that is cool. I like when media references other media of its time, but maybe doesn't give you the context, but gives you enough
Yes.
to do your own research if you feel like it.
Yes.
Because I think there are a lot of times
like
where,
that.
If I read something that's older, I'm using that very vaguely, but if it references a current event or, even like a pop culture figure that I'm not aware of, and then you go down the rabbit hole of Googling these things and listening to music or looking up, whoever are referenced in this work. I think that sort of like meta layer to it is very interesting. So I like that, like giving enough clues where someone could dig if they wanted to, but not fully explicitly saying this person and this project is what I am referencing right now. There's no bibliography to it. So.
Yes. I mean, I'm a big fan of that. Like, I totally agree with you on that. I mean, I don't know if you've digged into my own writing. I've been writing a lot about this past year. Like, my poetry collection is about a person, and it's about the cowboy. And no one, well, my friends know who it is, but like, it's also no one I ever really dated or anything. So it's really curious, like how I built it up and how kind of my readership knows about this person as the cowboy now. And so I'm
That's
very much
interesting.
into like myths and mysterious abstractions in my poetry. Yeah.
What does the cowboy represent in that work? Like, what do you like the imagery of a cowboy?
Yeah. Well, the person that I start, like, I mean, I think at the end of last year, I realized the cowboy is not really anymore this person at all. Like, it's just become this, I don't know, this muse in a way. But I remember I called it a cow, like I called him a cowboy because I felt he was a coward, but I looked for another word that had the word cow in it, and I'm really into like cowboys and cowboy aesthetics. So I called him the cowboy, but because he was a coward, not because he's an actual cowboy.
No, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. I like that a lot. And I think maybe if you could argue that, at least in media and film, right, cowboys are these heroic characters and how they're depicted. So I do like that, how it can be sort of twisted as being
Yes.
derogatory about it. No, it's reminding me of what is the David Lynch movie with the cowboy
Oh,
talking about?
Oh, yeah. I think is
I
it,
think it's in
but it's
Mulholland
not.
Drive
Yeah, I
where
was thinking of that.
this like ominous, it's just the cowboy, and that's all you know about the character. Sorry, so I was just picturing
Yeah.
that character. Um,
Yes. I like
but
that.
I know, I think that is very topical because I think that, I guess what I was getting at when I was tripping over my words about the writing process behind this project is that, I think that projecting something onto a romantic relationship or a person,
Yes.
uh, I think it's fucked up. But I feel like when you really know a person, you know every detail about them in a very real way.
Hmm.
I don't think it's as creative because I don't think that your the creative part of your brain isn't filling in these pieces for you. You know everything as
Yes.
fact. I think that when you don't know a person, and that part of your brain does have to fill in gaps to satisfy your need for information, I think that can be a really helpful creative
Yeah.
tool. So
It
that's
is
interesting.
very creative.
I'm
It's
curious to
like
know
an
who
own,
the
you create
cowboy
an own
is now.
character. So is everyone else. I'm not saying it. One day maybe. When I'm old, I'm gonna be like, so he was the cowboy, by the way.
Oh no,
um yeah.
you froze.
Um
Hold
are
on.
you still there?
Uh,
Oh, there
Sorry,
you
you
are.
froze
Okay.
for a second
Yes.
there.
Yeah, it's fine. It was frozen for a little bit. It's fine. We're back on.
Okay.
It's
Um,
like, okay. You can hear me all right again?
I can hear you just fine. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay.
Let me turn
No
off
worries.
Wi-Fi on a couple devices. Sorry, you're gonna have so much to cut out, but this might be
No, that's
okay.
fine. That's why I don't. No, you wanted to say something. You had a thought. I saw it.
No, sorry, you were talking about the cowboy, and then it kind of
Oh,
just
yeah.
froze. So
Well, I just said I would say who he is when I'm old and dying. I don't think it's especially because, like, as you said, it's more of like a projection. It's not really. I mean, I know who the guy is, and I have met him since then a couple of times, and I do think he sort of thinks he is it, but like the thing is, it's not a it's not a compliment. Like it's not a it's like, oh, like you behaved not correctly and then just ghosted and disappeared into the air. So it's not really a compliment if I would be like, well, everyone, he's the cowboy, so it makes sense that he never really actually, and as I said, he's a bit of a coward, so of course he would not come to me and be like, am I the cowboy, so yeah. It's
no, it's interesting how something like that, like an aesthetic or maybe a period of media can just
mm,
be abstracted so much, and you can like now, I feel like you could just take so many different meanings out of what is a cowboy,
yeah,
what is that symbolism, and because even when it was peaking in popularity in media, it was already a past
yeah.
whatever you want to aesthetic. um,
I agree.
so I think that's really interesting, and I mean I feel like everyone at some point has used that as a creative tool, right? Like you look at an image and you try and write
Mm,
or paint in, what's happening in this scene that you're looking at. So
yeah, nice, nice.
um,
um
awkward transition between questions.
no, it's okay. um I was sort of thinking if because you also mentioned the cowboy aesthetics in the suggested topics, and so did you like I know in the 50s a lot of westerns came out, and that's where kind of I mean, that wasn't that the wet like that was peak western time, like, right? Like that's when Clint
Yeah, I
Eastwood
mean,
and like
We could Google this, but I feel like 40s into the 50s, maybe early
Yes.
60s, that range.
Yes.
Um,
Is that why you suggested it? Because you were
oh,
inspired by the 50s?
well, I think I was imagining that the record sounded more country Americana than it actually does.
Mm.
So, but no, I mean, we can drop that one if you feel like it doesn't have
Not.
weight in the project. I do think
Mhm.
that I was drawn towards imagery of the 50s, and I think that maybe with the music of the time, with country having a presence and actually being decent,
Yes.
enjoyable music, and within the genre, and I mean, I think it has relevance, and I think that it has its own sort of weird cultural significance and symbolism now.
Yeah.
And so I do like the juxtaposition of, you know, what country music, what Americana, like what those topics sort of
Hmm.
mean in our current world, and how can you sort of abstract that and make it something that is like this, vulnerable, like, or this like queered kind of thing that still has some sort of root in something that has completely different symbolism. I feel like I botched what I
Yeah.
was trying to say and it didn't come out eloquently, but
No.
um,
Um. I would.
the,
So, would you describe an egg moon in April as country slash Americana? Because I bet you found, like, if you put that in Groover, that's how you probably find me, because that's most of that's most of the submissions that I get. Um, but it's curious because I think I wouldn't have described this album in particular country, actually, which is
yeah, I
interesting.
think I think it's a failure on my part if the premise going in before it was anything more personal as just a joke project was meant to be sort of a parody
Mm,
of a
right,
genre.
rockability, and yeah,
um, but I think once
I feel like
oh, sorry, what?
no, I feel like it's I feel like I wouldn't even have picked a genre to describe the album, actually, because it's, as I said, and as you said, it's this project, it's this art piece, it's this. I don't feel like I don't even feel like we should put a genre to it. I think I was just verbally processing that I just didn't consider it country.
No,
um,
that's fair. I mean, do you feel like Americana, country are so just sort of embedded in the foundation, and folk are sort of
mm,
embedded in sort of what defines maybe rock or more current like
mm,
indie rock as a genre, and even pop, and indie pop,
yeah,
and
for sure.
so it's like it's this thing that's existed that finds its way to weasel into so many different things that it's
Hmm.
sort of like
For
you can
sure.
take it as influence and it doesn't necessarily mean it is country.
Yes. Oh, that's true. Oh, now I know where you came from with this one.
But it's like yeah, for me to really make well, what is not? I mean, backtracking now, like what would be an authentic country album, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because a lot
I
of
guess.
things that were released as country historically and especially now like are not made by people on their ranch,
Yeah.
right? Uh, so it's already like it's already sort of an abstraction, or not an abstraction, but uh, an
A
act.
wide,
Yeah, like
yeah,
that's a
widespread.
persona.
Yeah,
um
that's true. It's sort of it is the cowboy, isn't it? It's this normal guy
the
that you just put the
facade, yeah.
label on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I'm coming from a point where it's just like I have a bunch of musician friends that absolutely hate country and don't get that I like listening to it. And then I look at their own music and I'm like, well, as you said, you your music is rock, you know that rock came from like country, like, you know. So it's like, but I think it's because like people, I think it's curious because there was a lot of, especially nowadays, there was a lot of concourse about like Beyonce's album was like like in the Grammy nominations, it's considered country, right? And then there was a lot of disagreement, but also agreement, and it's like interesting because like there are either these people, like there are either people that see that journey that country did, like, you know, like as someone, like I wrote my thesis on jazz, so, and I wrote it but like on late jazz where it goes into country. And so I was like, I had a lot of arguments with my music professor because they hated country but loved jazz, and so I was just deep diving with them on that. But it's like, I think there are two kinds of people. There's one kind of people that thinks country is just like Johnny Cash or Will Nelson, and then there's the other side that think that, like us, that see the journey from country and that it has influenced, that it probably still in like, yeah, it still influences our music nowadays. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think if you think that country is only Johnny Cash
Yes.
and Willie Nelson, I think that you still seem to have a better appreciation for it than a lot of people who only hear like current top 40 country that
Right.
is manufactured in a room of people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
a conference table where they're writing the most marketable song. I think that, I mean, it's interesting. I think that culturally, I can't claim that this is what happened, right? But I think that from my own personal experience making music, you know, I think growing up in Virginia, I wasn't really in the South, you know, but I think being closer to the South,
Yeah.
I think that there is a sort of, you know, I think you grow up seeing country music as this negative thing, and it's like sort of almost like, why would you make that kind of music? And so I think it's a combination of getting older and exploring more, you know, bluegrass and Americana and you know, older or more underground country. But I think also after a certain point, if you've explored different genres and gone down these rabbit holes, in my personal experience, it was sort of the last thing that I hadn't touched. It was sort of like what I was listening to got more and more complicated and abstract and weird and dissonant. You know, I was discovering Tim Buckley at maybe 18 or 19, and then from there it's like, well, then he was inspired by what, like free jazz at the time. So then you go down the you know, Ornette Coleman or you know, the Coltrane or whatever sort of rabbit hole, and then I never was good enough or proficient enough as a musician to play jazz, you know, but it was something that I thought was really interesting, and maybe I was trying to incorporate elements of. But then to go full 180 and go back to the most basic chord structures and some of the most, you know, stripped down music writing that you can do, I think that it was sort of the last thing that I hadn't explored, maybe aesthetically. And I think it's also complex when you are American and you are from a technically southern state, and so it's like I don't identify as, you know, a southern person, or you know, it's hard to identify even as an American, even though you are inherently that. But I think you avoid that, and I think that a lot of American music is trying not to sound inherently American. And so I think to then explore something that is, you know, a culture that you were born into, and that you know, and a part of the country that, you know, you were born in, I think it is rich with that kind of exploration and that kind of recontextualization. Because you're sort of appropriating your own sort of background and culture and recontextualizing it in a weird way. So
exploration is that's a good word of how I would describe an egg moon in April. It's an exploration of genres and moods and different tones. Like that's how it sounded to me. that was the word that I was looking for. Thanks very much.
I'm glad that you say that, because I think I already said, I was concerned that it
Yeah.
was too consistent or monotonous. So
No.
it's very good.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, like, so out of curiosity then, like with country, like what attracts you to that as a sort of, other than that it bled into other genres, of course. I mean, what attracts you to that aesthetic, if it's inspiration behind your writing or anything else?
I think there's I think there's a darkness to it. There's a like if if you start listening to Johnny Cash, it's like I feel like most we're talking about typical country, like in quotes, typical country music. It's very like uplifting, or like people dance to it, or like people drink and dance to it, and you put it on to like get lift you in a better mood. Like it's on the radio and things like that down in the South. But it's like if you really like listen to the lyrics, especially like Johnny Cash or something, there's a darkness and there's a depth to it. And then and then you start researching things and you find out about like the histories, and like especially southern states in America have a very rich history of like darkness and injustices. And so it's like I think I'm drawn to that, like the yeah, I think I'm drawn to that.
Well,
That's a
it's interesting. I agree with you. I think that a lot of the country, or even more recent sort of, like, I guess, indie, in quotations, and same with recent in quotations, because I'm thinking of like Songs
yes.
Ohio or something that's still like 20 years old. But no, I think there is a darkness, and I think that the sort of, the Southern Gothic kind of aesthetic has its own appeal outside of what mainstream
Yeah.
country is or offers. And this is a side note that you can cut out, and this is an overgeneralization because I'm sure that plenty of people have different experiences, but being in parts of North Carolina or Virginia and interfacing at points with, real country people, it seems that they listen to a lot of like classic rock. They listen to a lot of like AC/DC, but I don't think I've
Nice.
ever encountered like actual like rednecks listening to current country music. I'm sure that exists outside of what I've experienced, but it's just interesting because if you asked me to like define what people in those regions were listening to, it would be like classic rock or something. And I don't know who listens to mainstream country, but
yeah, it's I'm definitely gonna cut this out, but I was just my answer would probably be like rich, white, privileged kids.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I think it is like, it's like people who live in the suburbs that are on like the border between the country, maybe, who pretend they're country, but they are just rich, isolated people.
Yes. To wrap it up, the question I ask every single person, I'm curious, who would be your legend?
Legend, the cowboy.
I like that. Thank you for being
Yeah, of
a guest
course.
on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Howdy, enjoyed listening to this episode. You know the gist, you know what to do. Make sure to subscribe and share this episode with all of your friends, and leave a review so more people can tune in to my conversations with my legends. This podcast episode is hosted, edited, and produced by Bonnie Orbison. Support her continuous work on her paid Substack, which is like an online diary, and she shares her poetry and lyrical essays on there, or get one of her books. Right now she has 2 fictional novels in German and English out, and now as well a poetry collection called Pretty Tennessee. This podcast is managed by the Queer Lounge, and the theme song is by Evie Solis. Video clips of this episode and anthems of the day on our Instagram at Bonnie's Legends, and we're also sharing from Monday to Friday daily the new music releases, so make sure to check that out. This episode is sponsored by Zencaster. Use my special link in the show notes to save 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. See you next time!